for coming to the Title IX Basics training. I do a series of Title IX trainings, one each term. All of our faculty and staff are required to attend at least one Title IX training annually, so thank you for coming and checking that off your to-do list, because I won't need to hunt you down next term. So this is our Title IX Basics training. So if you've been through the Basics training before, a lot of this might be a refresher for you, but there will be some new pieces of information tucked in, because the world of Title IX is constantly changing. So today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about what Title IX is, what Title IX requires of the college as a whole, what that means for you as faculty and staff, and then we'll run through some scenarios of where you might encounter Title IX in your day-to-day work. So to start out with, can anybody tell me what Title IX is? And crickets, which is normally the response I get, so that is okay.
A very convoluted law to protect the students.
The gender equity law?
A very convoluted gender equity law is probably the best way to put it. So Title IX is part of the Education Amendments Act of 1972. So it's not a new law, it's been around for quite some time. All colleges and universities have been required to be in compliance with it since 1978. It's a law that prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex in any educational institutes that receive federal funding. So even though we are a private college, since our students are eligible for financial aid, we are obligated to follow Title IX. Title IX originally started to ensure athletic equity, was where it really started, but it's really grown over the years to encompass a whole lot more than just athletics. Now, as I said, the world of Title IX is always changing, so throughout this presentation, I'll be telling you about some potential changes that might be coming. So back in November, the Office of Civil Rights released proposed regulatory updates that would really radically change how we implement and understand Title IX. The period of public comment for those proposed changes just closed at the end of January. The Department of Ed received over 105,000 different comments on it, mostly not pumped about all the changes. But so the proposed regulations could take effect any day. We were originally anticipating that they were going to go into effect in February, but based on the overwhelming feedback that the Department of Ed got, it's kind of on hold right now, so we're in a little bit of a limbo. We're not sure what those regulations are going to look like when they're actually put into practice. So throughout this presentation, I'll be telling you, how we're operating right now, but how things might change depending on how that regulation goes into effect. All right. So as I mentioned, Title IX originally started with the purpose of ensuring equity in athletics, but it has really grown over the years. So Title IX protects students from sex or gender discrimination. And when we say sex or gender discrimination, that includes everything from institutional equities, so making sure that our policies at an institutional level are equitable for all of our students. Still equity in athletics, we have to do annual reporting to ensure that our athletic programs are equitable for our male and female athletes. It also protects students who are experiencing pregnancy or recently experienced childbirth or the adoption of a child or placement of a foster child. Sexual harassment, sexual assault and rape, intimate partner violence, and stalking are all things that are covered under Title IX. And finally, retaliation for reporting. So as you can see, there's a broad umbrella of different things that could constitute Title IX related issues. Title IX does protect both women and men. It is aimed at providing equity for all students, regardless of gender. Some ways that might play into effect is if we have a male student whose partner is pregnant or a partner has recently given birth, they would be offered some protections under Title IX to be able to help care for their partner or a new child, just as a female student would. So it does protect both men and women. Title IX protects students on the basis of gender and gender expression. You might have heard in the news back in the end of 2017, there was a lot of talk about Title IX because a lot of the guidance surrounding protections for transgender students was rescinded by the Department of Ed. Even though those guidance documents were rescinded, the protections that were already written into the law were still there. They just rescinded the kind of guidance of how to implement that, so our students are still protected on the basis of gender. And Title IX protects students both on and off campus. So even if they're experiencing some type of sex or gender discrimination off campus, maybe an intimate partner violence or domestic violence situation, there would still be Title IX protections for them. Now, like I said, we have some potential changes we need to be aware of. Some of the potential changes coming down the pike could be that the protections for all of our trans, non-binary, and gender non-conforming students may no longer be included under provisions for sexual harassment or gender harassment. Under the new definitions, Sexual harassment would be specific to sex, not gender, and therefore a lot of the protections currently there for, like I said, trans, non-binary, or gender non-conforming students would no longer exist under Title IX. Also, protections for students who experience sex discrimination off campus would drastically narrow in scope. So the only instances in which Title IX would now offer protections for students experiencing sex discrimination off campus would be if they specifically experience sexual assault, harassment, anything like that, at a campus-sponsored off-campus event. So unless they were at like a college field trip, an athletic event,
like the Olympic skating, right?
Yeah.
Like when, well, no,
Yeah.
that's a serious question.
Yeah,
When they have
'cause
like
that would
a
be a
Wednesday night.
Yeah, that would be a college-sponsored event.
Okay.
Yeah. But the only off-campus instances would be those that were directly related to a college-sponsored activity.
So if we would have a student, like I teach a lot of continuing ed students who aren't ever on campus, comes to me and shares with me that she's in a situation of domestic violence, she would no longer be protected at all under Title IX because she's not on campus? Wow.
So these are all changes at the federal level in Title IX. It doesn't mean that institutionally we can't put policies in place that would protect students, but that federal level of protection would go away. So what does Title IX actually require of colleges? So Title IX requires that we have clear procedures for how we handle Title IX complaints and annual reporting on the number or type of Title IX complaints that we receive. So we do have a fairly extensive sexual misconduct policy that's in our student handbook. We also have a student policy. So we do have very clear outlined procedures about how we handle different sorts of Title IX issues that come up. We do also annual report on the number and type of Title IX complaints that we have. That's in our annual security report, which is posted on our website each year. Title IX also requires that annual training be provided to all faculty, staff, and students. That's why you're here today. So check that off your list. It also requires that we have trained investigators and hearing board members. So we do currently have 3 folks on campus who know how to do Title IX investigations. Ron, myself, and Trang in HR are all our investigators on campus. And we do also have a pool of about 10 hearing board members who go through a couple hour-long training process to be able to serve on Title IX hearing boards. Title IX also requires that we do prevention and awareness programming aimed at stopping sexual violence and harassment. So any of the programming that's coming out of my office would be speaking to this, whether that be passive programming. You've probably seen some of these Ignite action flyers around campus. We have those that go around. We also do a number of events throughout the year. And so I'm going to take this moment to shamelessly plug the fact that Sexual Assault Awareness Week is coming up, April 15th through 19th, so the second week of next term. I would encourage you all, if you're interested in getting involved, let me know. I would be happy to find a way for your department or academic program to get involved. And also please encourage students to get involved. There's a lot of really great programming that's going to happen that week. We have seen the flyers for the Walk a Mile in Her Shoes event. We're up to 12 male students that have committed to walk around campus in heels, raising money and awareness around issues of gender violence. We'll have a It's On Us pledge table, the Bring the Clothesline project to campus, a representative from Marsley's Law for PA, which is a crime victims Bill of Rights law, will be coming to speak. So a whole lot of great programming, so please encourage students to get involved in that. Back to what Title IX requires of us. Title IX also requires that all reports of sex or gender discrimination which are made to a responsible employee are promptly investigated, addressed, and documented. Which begs the question, who is a responsible employee? Any guesses?
All of us.
Everybody. Yeah. Any employee that a student could reasonably assume that by informing this employee they're informing the institution is considered a responsible employee. So for most of our students, if they are talking to a college employee, in their mind they're talking to the college. So any employee that a student would disclose sex or gender discrimination to is considered a responsible employee. Now again, I said there might be some changes. This is another area where we could see some changes. Under the new proposed regulation, colleges would only be responsible for formal complaints made by a student directly to the Title IX coordinator or a senior administrator. So it would shrink the scope of responsible employees to myself and the cabinet members. would become the only responsible employees on campus. It would also mean that colleges would no longer be held liable for failing to address complaints if they were brought to the attention of another college employee and that employee did not notify a designated official. So even if a student told one of their faculty members that they were experiencing something and that faculty member didn't tell anybody, the college would have no liability. Same thing for staff members. So that is a proposed change that could be coming down the pipe. Yeah.
If the college had a policy in place as a matter of college policy, that anyone who was notified of a Title IX violation had to report it to the Title IX coordinator, would that change that at all?
It wouldn't change our liability under Title IX, but if a student were to look at, say, a civil suit that we weren't following our own published policies, that would certainly be an avenue. But in terms of a Title IX complaint, the Office of Civil Rights wouldn't touch it. All right, so it hasn't happened yet. So for the time being, congratulations, you are all responsible employees. So what exactly does that mean? So as a responsible employee, you have three main obligations. The first is to let students know that you are a responsible employee. The second being to notify myself of any reports of sex or gender discrimination that are made to you. And then finally directing the student to available resources. So kind of break down what each of those looks like. So the first being notifying students of your responsibility. I would encourage you all to let students know up front as much as possible that you are a responsible employee. If a student is talking to you and believes that they are telling you something in confidence that's not going to go anywhere, and then they find out once they've disclosed, oh, and by the way, I'm going to have to go let this other office know what you just told me, that can be traumatic for a student. So whenever you can, let students know up front. Whether that's putting a statement in your syllabus and talking about it on the first day of class, if you regularly have student workers in your office, talking with them about the fact that you're a responsible employee. If you are a club advisor, talking with the students in your club about the fact that you're a responsible employee. Being really upfront about the fact that any reports made to you would need to be passed along to the Title IX office. The only 100% confidential resource on campus are our campus counselors. So any disclosures made to one of our campus counselors can stay with the campus counselor and does not need to be reported to my office. The only thing that the counseling office would report to me is the number of disclosures that they received, with no identifying information tied to them. But other than that, any reports would need to funnel their way to my office. So I have up here just a sample syllabi statement. I do have this available electronically, so don't really need to be scribbling it down. But this, like I said, could be a really good way to let students know up front that you are a responsible employee that would need to disclose information. And also directing them to the counseling office if they want to speak with someone confidentially. So if a student does disclose sex or gender discrimination to you, just a couple do's and don'ts. Best thing to do is thank that student for sharing. It can be a really hard thing to do to open up about an experience like that, and ask how you can best support them. They might just want you to listen. They might want your help getting connected to different resources, but let them know that you're there to support them. Things not to say, and some of these might seem obvious, but I like to go through them anyway, is to kind of question their experience. Like, well, were you drinking? What were you wearing? Well, why didn't you call anyone or report it sooner? And also not telling them, well, you need to report this or not report this so that whatever outcome would happen. Just trying to be open and supportive to any students who may disclose. So if a student has disclosed to you, as soon as possible, notify my office that you've received that report. What will happen from there is that I would reach out to that student to introduce myself, to determine if there's what level of investigation might be needed. If they're disclosing something that happened to them off campus with a non-student, there's not really any type of investigation that we would be able to do, obviously. If they're reporting that they experienced, let's say, a violent sexual assault on campus, we have to investigate that. We have a duty to protect the safety of our students and our campus community. So determine the level of investigation that might be needed. Let the student know what their rights are, their rights and options under Title IX, including the process to file a formal complaint with the college, how to go about filing a police report, or both, depending on what is brought forward. And then determining any needed remedies to assist and support the student. So this is all very case by case, depending on what the student's disclosing and what their needs are. But I would meet with them to let them know what their rights and options are and determine the best ways that we can support them. Another potential change that we might see is that moving forward, colleges may only be required to investigate a complaint if a student submits a signed written request for an investigation. Would be the only time that we would be required to do any sort of investigation unless we receive multiple complaints about the same respondent. Would be the only two instances under the new proposed regulation that the college would have any legal duty to investigate. So once you've notified my office that you've received a report, please don't share or discuss the information with anyone else. Student information related to Title IX incidents is protected, and just because a student felt comfortable enough to disclose something to you doesn't necessarily mean that they want anybody else to know about it. So please keep that information confidential. And then finally, directing the student to resources. Our campus counselors are a fantastic resource to direct our students to, and then also my office. Both in the counseling office and my office, we can get the student connected with community resources if needed, whether that be local domestic violence advocates, legal advocacy, medical advocacy, whatever they might need. We can help get them connected to community resources if we don't have the resources on campus to fully support them. And then finally, engaging in self-care. Being told about another person's experience, depending on what they're disclosing, could be really triggering or traumatizing for you as the person hearing and receiving that. So please engage in self-care. We do have the college's life assistance plan, which can get all faculty and staff connected with counseling services if needed. So definitely be engaging in self-care. Any questions? Yeah.
If we refer a student to talk to you about their issue, do we still need to contact you too?
I would maybe shoot me an email and be like, I am sending a student your way who will be talking with you about an issue. Let me know if they're headed my way.
And would that be enough to satisfy our notification obligation?
Yep.
Okay.
I was gonna ask that too. I wasn't sure if we need to physically walk that student right then and there to your office, or say this is who you should seek out.
No, and so a student, if a student absolutely does not want to talk to me, we can't force them to talk to me, that's fine. But you would at least want to notify me, should call, email something, hey, I talked to this student, they told me this, I let them know about your office, and I can take it from there. Okay. So it's, I'm sorry.
Can you send out, or like stop by, get some business cards?
Yeah,
So that I can give the students who, as a referral? to you?
absolutely, yeah. I can drop them by your office.
So we can put whatever they say in writing to you, even if the student doesn't want us to. As we tell them this, I have to share this with other people.
Yeah.
We can put it all in writing. It's not an issue. Okay.
Yeah. And that's why I really encourage folks to let students know up front that you would need to share anything. So if the student started to disclose something to you, it would even be worth it to stop and be like, I really appreciate that you're sharing this with me. Before you go any further, I want to let you know that anything you tell me, I'm going to have to tell the Title IX office. So if you don't want this information going to the Title IX office, let me walk you over to the campus counselors.
With the way that people on the campus can see our emails in terms of being able to recover them and whatnot, is there any type of confidentiality issue if we would talk about that in an email? Because not that they'd be looking for that specifically, but
it's a form of official college communication, so that would be alright. Yes.
So I'm the advisor to the esports club. That looks like we discriminate. If you came in to watch us play, you won't see any females there. We have one female member and the rest are all males. What's our obligation to, we don't discriminate against females, we just haven't had any that approach me to join the team except for the one. Do we have an obligation to try to get more females?
We have an obligation to provide equitable opportunities for involvement. So if female students are welcome to join with the same qualifications needed to join that a male student would have, you're okay. And so for our athletic teams, we need to look at the number of students that we have versus the number of opportunities that they have to be involved athletically is what we have to look at when we're looking at the equitable distribution of athletic resources. It doesn't mean that we have to spend the exact same dollar amount per team. Some teams have higher equipment costs or higher, facility rental costs, and that's okay. They just need to be proportional. So for instance, if we have two teams, let's just say two volleyball teams, men's and women's volleyball team. If one team, every time that they travel, they get packed 4 students into a room and are told that they need to eat McDonald's, and the other team gets a whole hotel room to themselves for each player and gets to go out for steak dinners, we're not equitably supporting those teams. So we look at things like that, that when our teams travel, are they getting equitable, meal vouchers, equitable accommodations, things like that. Any other questions before we dive into some scenarios? Alright, so scenario number 1. A student comes into the business office with a concern. He doesn't think he's going to be able to make the next payment on his payment plan because he just got out of an abusive relationship and is still getting his finances together. Title IX, not Title IX, what would we need to do in this case?
I would say no, because you don't really have any information. And it's not my place to say, tell me more about your abusive relationship, so I can share it with the Title IX coordinator.
So this one actually would be one that you would want to shoot a notice to my office. So if the student is disclosing that they are a survivor of domestic violence or partner violence, we'd still want to at least notify my office so that I could connect them with support services. So there are a lot of support services for survivors of domestic violence, and we would want to connect the student with that, and then also make sure that them leaving this abusive relationship and all that goes along with that is not interfering with their ability to access their education, which is really what kind of Title IX boils down to, is their access to education. So we would want to see if there were any ways that we could support that student.
Would we need to tell the student at that point that we need to notify the Title IX office?
Yeah.
About, okay.
Mm-hmm. And it can be as simple as, it doesn't need to be, if you just disclose sex discrimination to me and I need to report you, it could be, hey, I'm really sorry to hear you got out of an abusive relationship. I'm going to pass your name on to our Title IX officer. She can connect you with some resources. It could be as simple as that.
Would there be any obligation to work with that student based on that disclosure in regard to the payment? They can't make the payment. Do we have some obligation to?
We would not have an obligation to make the payment for the student, but we would have an obligation to see what support services we could offer to that student. Several students are gathered in the hallway outside your office. You overhear one of the students mention that they are worried about their roommate. They think their roommate may have been raped in an off-campus party last weekend, but won't talk about it. Yeah, what might you do if you hear this conversation happening right outside your hallway? Yes, this would be a good opportunity. It certainly would fall under Title IX. It would be a good opportunity to pop out and say, hey, I heard you were worried about your roommate. And even if they don't want to give up their roommate's name, that's fine, but encourage that student who's concerned to come to my office. Say, hey, if you're worried about your roommate, we have an office on campus that might be able to help. Let's get you connected that way.
And if nothing happens for that, do we try to get their name, or how does that work? Say when we overheard it, that had no idea what students are. What's our next move? We can only encourage them, but we have no idea who they are.
I mean, you could certainly ask them for their name. It is a third party, so we wouldn't have the level obligation to track them down and find them, but at least to provide that information. The student is in their admissions interview. You ask them to describe a time that they overcame an obstacle. The student shares that they are a sexual assault survivor and believe that they are stronger for having survived it.
Not a student.
Yeah, they're not a student. It's a historical perspective.
Yep.
It's not something that happened here.
Exactly, yeah. This would not fall under Title IX. For one, a student who's in their admissions interview is not actually a student of ours yet. They're still an applicant. So they would not be covered under Title IX in that case. But also they're describing something that's a past occurrence. So that wouldn't be something that's occurring now during their student journey. So it wouldn't be something that would be covered under Title IX. The same thing might happen if you have say a writing assignment or discussion post for one of your students and they disclose something that happened in their past in that writing or discussion post. If it happened prior to them being a student, it wouldn't be a Title IX at that point either.
So then the first scenario where the student said they just got out of an abusive relationship, to me that's passed also.
Well, if they're actively in in the process of getting out to the point where they made a payment and now can't because they're leaving this relationship is something that's happening to them actively and currently.
Okay.
It's not, I had an abusive relationship 3 years ago, so my credit's messed up. It's, I'm leaving a relationship now, I can't get everything together right yet.
Okay.
Mary Beth.
When do they officially become a student?
Um,
What category, once they're accepted or once they step foot on campus and take a class?
once they sit in their first class.
Sit in the first
Yeah.
class.
Now, or move on to campus housing. So for students that move in, a couple days before classes start, at the point that they are on campus there.
Yeah, I'm a little unclear about the scope of our obligation. If I find out that a student was sexually assaulted on campus, I have to notify you and send them, make sure that they report that to you. That seems like it would be the most highest level of obligation. But what do we have to do? Do we have to then, is it just a matter of providing them with resources? Are we obligated under Title IX to investigate and bring the offender to justice? What
As
what
the
is our
college as a whole,
obligation?
or the college as a whole, or you as a responsible employee?
No, I mean the college as a whole. What do we have to do?
So that's a tricky question. So a lot of it has to do with what the complainant or the person who's experienced it wants. So we might have a student come forward that said, I experienced some level of sexual assault. We don't have any reason to believe that the perpetrator is an active threat to campus, which is when we have to do the full investigation, is if there's an active ongoing safety concern there. They might come forward and say, maybe I'm experiencing sexual harassment. I don't want to file a formal complaint. I don't want to go for a hearing board, but I also don't want to have to sit in class next to this person. Can you help me with the support service? So it's really case by case depending on what the complainant kind of needs in terms of support services. But there are certainly situations where if there's an imminent safety concern to the campus community, that the college would need to move forward with an investigation and potential disciplinary hearings, even if the complainant didn't necessarily want that to happen.
And one more thing, if we don't do that, if we don't follow up and conduct an investigation into that, is that a violation of Title IX or is that a violation of some other obligation? I mean, does Title IX require us to investigate if the student asks us to?
If the student asks us to,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay.
If the student wants to have an investigation, we are absolutely required to investigate. Yes.
Question, going back to the last scenario where you overhear somebody talking that they may have been raped. Just got me to thinking, what's our responsibility with notifying security if the event happens on campus?
If it happens on campus, yeah, Ron and I work really closely together on that.
I mean, so if I notify you, is Ron automatically notified, or do I need to notify him as well that?
You would just need to
report?
notify my office, and
Okay.
then depending on what's reported and if there's that safety concern there, I would be working with Ron. If you just need to get to my office and I'll take it from there in terms of any notifications.
Yeah,
that might need.
obviously, if you come across a situation where something bad is happening, I would call Ron first.
Yeah,
In
if you
the
encounter
event.
something actively
Witness,
occurring in the
yeah.
moment, then yeah, definitely call public safety.
Okay, I just wanted to be sure.
A student worker in your office jokingly mentions that a student in one of their classes is being very weird, following them around campus, trying to get their number. They say they've been walking everywhere with friends to avoid running into their shadow alone.
Yep.
And why yeah?
Stalking.
So what in this scenario leads us to believe that this might be stalking and not just somebody trying to get a number?
Following them around, they actually get weird.
Yeah. So the following around to the point that they feel comfortable walking by themselves anywhere, those are the types of things that we're looking for that elevate it from somebody maybe just trying to hit on them, maybe has a little bit of boundary issues, to somebody who is stalking. If it's the kind of things that we look for with that is if it's a pattern of behavior, so it's not just one instance, it's something that's happening repeatedly, a pattern of behavior that's directed at one person. So they're only following this student around trying to get their number, they're not following everybody around, to the point that it would make a reasonable person uncomfortable. Clearly this person is uncomfortable because they're walking with friends everywhere, so this is kind of checking the box that we could have a potential stalking situation. A student submits a work order to the maintenance department that their door is broken. When asked how it got broken, the student casually mentions that her boyfriend was mad at her and broke the door trying to get to her.
Wow.
Why, Max?
Wouldn't you be a little scared if your boyfriend was mad and was trying to get at you, broke the door? I'd be a little freaked out.
So this is might be Title IX. So we know that the boyfriend definitely sounds like he's got some anger issues, so that's concerning. And definitely caused some property damage, so that's concerning also. But we don't know if there's actual interpersonal violence happening. We don't know all the details around this fight to know what happened. Did he break the door because she grabbed his phone and ran and slammed the door and he was trying to get his phone back? We don't know all the details yet to know if this is a Title IX. But there's certainly enough red flags that it could warrant shooting an email to my office and saying, hey, we're worried about this. But we don't know yet if this is actually something that would fall under Title IX. Certainly some conduct issues there that would fall under our conduct code, but yeah.
So is that something that maintenance would have to report to you?
Mm-hmm.
Got it.
One of your advisees emails you a question about switching to online classes. She mentions that she is pregnant and just found out that she will need to be on bed rest for the rest of the current term. A lot of heads nodding. What's around that?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's worthwhile letting you know. I don't know that there's any real investigation. I mean, yep, she's pregnant.
Check.
It's out.
Yeah.
You
And so
know,
that's what we say with pieces like, determine the level of investigation needed. For a pregnant student needing support services, we're not going to launch a full investigation, but we are going to provide that student with support services if they're pregnant. So this is actually probably the most traffic that comes through my office, is students that are pregnant that need some sort of accommodation that might fall either under Title IX or ADA, depending on what hat I'm wearing. But certainly, even if it's a student that seems like they've got kind of everything together, they don't really need any extra help, maybe they're planning on just taking a term off and coming back and they've got everything figured out, still at least give them my contact information so that if they do run into a situation where they're not getting the support services that they need to be able to continue in their educational program, that I can kind of step in and help them get those support services.
Megan, what type of accommodations do you offer for situations like that?
So we've certainly worked with a number of pregnant students who have had complications to get their classes moved online. That's a really common one that we've seen over the past couple terms. We also have pregnant students that have needed, say, for our classrooms that have those really hard plastic chairs. We had a student that was having complications that her legs were going down in them, so we had to make sure that we got added chairs there for her. It could be, trying to think what other types of accommodations we've had. It might be working with students to do an LOA, depending on the types of complications that they might be.
Let's say we're in an online class and we get an email middle of the term saying, you know, I'm pregnant and my due date's not until next term, but say they would happen to go into labor early. What are we as faculty to do in terms of, let's say it's like during finals week or something like that. Can you walk through just a scenario of how that might be handled?
Yeah, so in that scenario, say it's finals week, we would probably work with that student to maybe give them an incomplete, to be able to work with them to finish out their work later. Certainly that late in the term, we would want to try to get the student those credits. If it's happening, early in the term and they went into labor really early and now they have a baby in the NICU that they need to be able to focus their energy there, doing a leave of absence and being able to get that student back on track once their baby's more stable.
And that's, I mean, for the incompletes, we have basically 2 weeks. So if it would even fall beyond that.
If it would fall beyond that, that's where under Title IX we would have some leeway to give some extensions
Okay.
there, if it's Title IX. And so this could also be, if a student is pregnant, we've had a number of instances of this that has some medical complications following a miscarriage. We would work with those students also. Anything that's pregnancy related, we'd be working with the student on. And again, if students need, this could be for a male student who currently just had a premature baby and needs to be able to be there and be involved, working with those students also. Yes.
I have one quick question. So, talking about mothers who are coming back and nursing, is that sort of like the same idea where you kind of like, they have to pump and their classes are back to back and there's only that 10-minute window?
Yeah. So if moms need accommodations to pump, they can come see me and I'll kind of
Okay,
walk through them with
sure.
that. We do have a room on campus that moms can use to pump.
Where's that?
It's over by HR.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
We do have a pumping room on campus.
Cool. Central Penn.
Tell us something.
No, I'm not pregnant. I did nurse before, so
Nicole
it's
is-
interesting.
She's hyperventilating over there.
I know it's a hypothetical.
An interesting piece of that, we did, our training last term was all about the intersections of Title IX and pregnancy, but a question that was brought up was, so if we have a mom who's coming back who is nursing, do I have to let the baby in my classroom? And the answer to that is no. We need to provide the mom with opportunities to nurse and opportunities to pump, but that does not mean that babies need to be in classrooms. You see a social media post from a student. The post contains a joke about people who can't hold their alcohol and a picture of another student who appears to be drunk and is partially exposed.
Oh.
Any thoughts on this?
That's appropriate.
Any thoughts on this?
Partially exposed.
Yeah.
So yes.
I'll let you know and then you can decide.
Course of action to date. This actually most likely would be now, unless the partially exposed student knew that the picture was being posted and gave their permission for it to be posted, unless all those boxes were checked, which is doubtful in this situation. This would 100% be a Title IX scenario. The sharing of explicit material without somebody's consent is a violation of our sexual misconduct policy. So 100% that this would be something you'd want to send my way. The student in one of your classes shares in a discussion board post that they are transgender. Another student responds with a rant about how being transgender isn't a real thing and you are whatever you're born. The first student emails you to let you know that they don't feel comfortable being in class anymore.
Email Megan.
You're filling your inbox here.
Yeah. Send it on my way. But seriously though, do send it on my way if you encounter these things. But this would 100% fall under yes.
In a situation like that, should the full extent of our response be to notify you? Or should we also, from a standpoint of being the professor, respond and say that that's not an appropriate way to interact on the discussion board and, or maybe even remove the student's post?
Yes. I would certainly say that as the faculty member in this scenario, to step in on that discussion post would be certainly something that I would encourage you to do, but then also loop me in so that I can be working with that student either to figure out what would make them still feel comfortable being in that class, if there's anything that we could do, or if they need kind of academic accommodations made to change their schedule.
Where does this cross the line from being free speech in an academic setting, as open discussion about feelings about this, to being Title IX? Is it the fact that it's a rant?
A rant directed at a particular student based on their disclosure that they are transgender.
Okay.
Now, if that same rant had been posted, so in this particular case, depending on what the language of the rant would be, it could fall into the realm of harassment if it's directed at that student based on their gender identity. Now, if that student had posted a rant just kind of standalone without the other student first saying that they're transgender, then that would be free speech, but we'd still be working with that student who now feels uncomfortable because they know somebody in their classroom is not inclusive of their gender identity. Any other questions? So those are all my scenarios. So if you do think of questions or encounter things that you're like, is this Title IX, is this not Title IX, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm more than happy to kind of talk through if you're not sure if something is or isn't. I'd rather you reach out to me than not if you're not sure. There are more trainings to come. In spring, I'll be doing a training specifically about how Title IX intersects with protecting our LGBT students. And then our 2019-2020 training schedule will be coming out soon. I'll be running it in similar format that I did this year, so I'll offer training each term, 2 of them being the basics. If you need a refresher, come back for the basics, but then 2 of them more targeted at specific areas that Title IX intersects with our student experience. Yeah.
Are you gonna send anything out if all these sweeping changes occur?
Oh, yeah.
Because if they do, it might be a good idea for us to review the basics since the rules will be changing.
Yes, depending on when those regulation changes take effect and what they actually look like when they're done, we'll probably be doing a mandatory retrain for everybody to get on board with what the new regulations look like.
Well, and there is something on the syllabus about this, isn't
Yeah.
there? Something like that would have to be changed and be updated in our courses and things.
And for a lot of the regulatory changes that may occur, it doesn't mean that we as an institution can't put institutional policies in place to protect our students, but it would be then protections at an institutional level, not a federal level. So some of the protections for students might stay the same, but it'll mean policy creation on our end.
So why did they decide to make all these changes? Just current government?
Yes.
I don't know when they originated, but okay.
If we're having a student contact you, Megan, do we have them do this email address, the Megan Peterson, or the compliance officer? Because I saw that they were two
Either one will
different
get to
emails.
me.
Okay.
Either one will get to me.
Alright.
So the compliance director is the kind of the general one that will always stay the same regardless of who is in
Okay.
the Title IX position. So I like to put that up there just so that if you have it say in your syllabus, you don't need to worry about changing it.
Okay.
Should the Title IX officer be someone else. But you can certainly have students use the Megan Peterson one, which can often be less intimidating than emailing your compliance
That's why I wasn't sure if like we, as instructors, would just use one and the students use another, or if it was the
Either
same.
one is fine. They'll both
Okay.
get to me.
Alright, yeah.
So if you ever think of a Title IX issue that you're like, oh, it'd be really cool to see a training around this, let me know, especially as I'm developing the 2019-2020 academic year training schedule. Certainly interested in ideas. That's how the Title IX pregnant and parenting students training last term came about, was a lot of faculty questions about how to best support pregnant students. So if you have ideas, send them my way. But thank you for coming and checking your annual training off the list, which actually don't need here.